Hey, my name is Kate and I'm part of the team here at Narrate. This week we start a new series called Want It, Have It, Wish I Didn't. The aim is to talk candidly about singleness, marriage, divorce and separation. Adam starts us off exploring an intriguing equation to allow healthy growth to occur in any relationship. That is, growth equals grace plus truth over time.
Just was really reminded this week of so grateful for all of you that kind of make this place what it is and the types of relationships that you create in your own lives. And I often am the one that get to sit across the table from people and hear the story, but it's not lost on me that you guys all play such a huge factor in all that. Excited to tell one, and then I just kind of also want to just reiterate of how privileged I am to work with this team, the staff, and just blown away. I'm convinced I'm really grateful for where we're at and really excited about the way we're headed, and so anyway, it's kind of awkward. I just had this sense of I just want to say good job, you guys. It's really fun. So this series, a couple months ago, we were sitting in creative team, which is usually a really fun conversation. And we were talking about this series, and I said, guys, I kind of want to do a relationship series, dating series, sex series, marriage series, all that kind of stuff. Some of you are like, you just said sex in church. It's okay, we'll be okay. But I kind of want to do this series about relationships, and kind of the vibe of it is this to speak to the fact that marriage is a funny thing because it's something that we spend a good portion of our lives like thinking we'll be happy when we have it, and then we finally get it, and then once we have the marriage, we often want to punch it back into the pond. And that's when we all kind of looked at each other and went, well, maybe we should just call it Want It, Have It, Wish I Didn't. Which is kind of snarky, but at the same time, we're hoping to grab hold of the tension of relationships. That's what happens, right? Some of you, even now, you're like, oh man, I could live in a shack forever if I could just find him or if I could just find her. It's the only thing I want in life. And then you get there, and the shack's not very nice, and you realize that the person who you thought was perfect, like you were psychotic to think they're perfect, you got all kinds of issues going on, and then you're like, could I just punt them back to the pond, please? So originally we wanted to film a video that we were going to go out to a friend's pond and we were going to have someone fishing for a really long time and then have them finally catching the fish and then punting the fish back. Only problem was all the candidates we had were like engaged and stuff, and we just didn't think that would send a very good signal. So then that big snowstorm hit and we just went, okay, so we'll do this amalgam of several things. So this morning what I want to do is, well, let me also say this. I recognize that some of you, your past has divorce in it, maybe even has current separation in it. Maybe you've been through several divorces. And I'm well aware of the fact that sitting in a place like this with your background, it takes some nerve on your part. And so if I could just extend our heart to you behind this series, to all of us, but especially to those of you that maybe live in this sense of shame, and I don't think you should live in a sense of shame, but our goal here is not to make anyone feel bad about the past. It's not to excommunicate anyone. We think the past is only relevant to the degree that God needs to talk to you about it for your future, because sometimes we have to go backwards to go forward. But it's not like this. We're gonna talk about separation. We're gonna talk about divorce. We're gonna talk about lots of different things, but never with an intent to make anyone feel poorly about themselves so much as to motivate all of us into God's kingdom and to think more about the way that he invites us to live. And this morning, I think will be a little anticlimactic because we're going to talk about relationship stuff, but this morning I am deeply indebted to Dr. Henry Cloud. By deeply indebted, I mean I have plagiarized his stuff like crazy this week. And that's not oh, that's humble. No, it's true. That's what I'm doing this week. I've heard him offer this material in several different contexts and different places, sometimes in person, sometimes in podcast. And I think it's absolutely foundational. And the good news is, even if you're here and you're I don't care about relationships, girls have cooties, or even if you're here and you don't feel like you have problems in that regard, I think in any area of your life where you're looking for change, this morning can be extraordinarily helpful. Because really what we're going to do this morning is we're going to ask this question, what do I need to do to make sure I grow? Have you ever found yourself in a relationship and you're hoping beyond hope that they're going to change, but you're wondering if you're crazy? Ever been there? I'm hoping there's change happening, but is there change happening? Or maybe you've watched a friend go through this and you're going no, they're not changing. Ever wonder if your hope, whether again it's in a relationship or a medical condition or your business or your leadership, ever wondered if your hope is unfounded? Unwise, irrational, dumb? What we're going to do this morning is what Dr. Henry Cloud talks so brilliantly about is that there are certain ingredients that absolutely have to be in place if growth is going to happen. And I don't usually speak in such absolutist, absolutely have to. I mean, that's strong language, but seriously, I think what we're going to talk about this morning is the most important thing you can take from the Bible. I think it's one of the most important things you could take from a modern study of like therapeutic, psychological kind of treatment. I think it's absolutely key and one of the major gifts God has for us in the scripture. Like at the risk of being too dramatic, I think knowing God's name is more important, but other than that, I can't think of something more important than what we're going to talk about this morning because it helps us define like when is change actually happening. And so specifically this morning, as it relates to your married life and your dating life, and if you're married, you shouldn't have a dating life. Like if we could just kind of be clear on that one, like those should be two separate things unless we're talking about your spouse. That's a good thing, but you're with me, right? Okay. I think this stuff is so pertinent as you think about change. And in fact, what'll happen for those of you that are people of the text, I think what you'll begin to see is you won't be able to read scripture without thinking about this formula. And I don't even like formulas. Like I'm that guy who doesn't like formulas. I like the messy over here. But I think that as you read scripture, what you'll see is that God has created an entire universe that is built around this particular formula. There's these three ingredients. And here's the way Dr. Cloud talks about them, that growth is grace plus truth over time. And I think individually we can probably all appreciate the role of them. What I'd like to do this morning is kind of spend some energy going, no, they all three have to happen. Just hoping change happens doesn't do anything. Just being really nice to somebody, and you know this, doesn't do anything. Just beating them over the head with truth doesn't do anything. Like there's this concoction that God uses over and over and over and over again. And what I love, listen, I went through this season where I was challenged to read a gospel a month for a year, and I did that for several years. And then I got a golden crown, like, because look at me, I'm amazing. I don't mean it like that at all. But there's this story that Jesus tells that I missed it. I did that for years, and I completely missed the brilliance of this parable. So whether you're, where's my stool? Whether you've been in the text several times or not, I think you'll probably find like, wow, that's there. And what's brilliant, this is what Jesus is so amazing. Like you could go buy any number of books off the psychology shelf at the bookstore, and they're going to talk about the neurological and scientific basis behind something Jesus talked about 2,100 years ago, which is why I love marrying those two things together. So in Luke chapter 12, chapter 13, it's the third gathering, my blood sugar's low. Jesus says this. He said, then he told this parable. A man had a fig tree growing in his vineyard, and he went to look for fruit on it, but did not find any. Everybody who gardens in Helena can appreciate what he's saying. So he said to the man who took care of the vineyard, for 3 years now I've been coming to look for fruit on this fig tree and haven't found any. Like I've been working my dogs off for years and nothing's happening. How many of you can relate to that? Like how many of you have been in a relationship where that was the reality? How many of you have worked on something in your own life and you became discouraged by your own ability to change? Like raise your hand if you can relate to that. Yeah, and the rest of you, we want you to stand up so that we can see what denial looks like in the flesh. Of course you've been through that. Like for 3 years, he's going, I've been waiting for this and nothing is happening. C.S. Lewis calls it the theology of the ought to. That you have this sense of by now, I should be a better, I've been married 10 years now. I should be a better husband. I've been working on my anger for 14 years now. I can't believe I prayed the prayer decades ago. I can't possibly be a Christian if I'm still having this issue. And what follows is what psychologists call a universal reaction. It's the normal reaction of the human brain. Watch. Cut it down. Why should it use up the soil? Get rid of it. Stop. Be done with it. Ever been there? Ever found yourself blowing up at your wife? Ever found yourself going back to one of those websites? Ever find yourself returning to your vomit, as the Proverbs call it, and going, man, I've been working on this for 7 years. There's no way I can be a Christ follower. Like, get rid of me. Ever found that place, guys, where you're just like, she deserves such a better person than me? Ever been there? Like, just cut it down. Be done with it. I'm hopeless. And that's the normal story, isn't it? Like, that's the predictable story. Now, here's what I love about Jesus in this story, and we'll get to the rest of it in just a second. But the New Testament, So in the New Testament, you've got Jesus who lived and died and rose again, and like he wrote the material, and then Paul came along and plagiarized it all and gave theology to it. It's somewhat of a joke, but like that's kind of what happens in the New Testament is Jesus does the stuff, and then Paul came along and he kind of gave it theology, and some guys, there's a soapbox, some guys are like more interested in Paul than Jesus, and I think that's unfortunate, but nonetheless. What Paul calls that reaction is the law. It's like when you read the New Testament, you're like, what is Paul saying about the law in Romans? Like, why is he bam, bam, bam about the law? This is what he's getting at. That there's this ought to. See, the reason you walked down the aisle was because you loved her or you loved him. And you had the ought to. You have an intuitive sense of the type of husband you ought to be, the type of parent you ought to be, the type of friend you ought to be, the type of leader. That's what the law is all about. Romans chapter 1, Paul says this thing that just kind of grabs hold of this whole deal. Let me flip there. In Romans 1:20, Paul says this. He says, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. See, what Paul's saying is you are built with a sense of ought to. You're built with an expectation. You're built with the standard. You're built knowing like I should be better by now. And it's really easy to get stuck there. And if you get nothing out of this morning, please hear me on this one. This is the way most of Helena, dare I say, most of people, most of the world, and I don't mean that as like the rest of those Christians are wrong and we're right. I don't mean it like that at all. I mean us. The way we typically think of Christianity is that's the definition of what it means to be a Christian. God is great. You're an idiot. Try harder. God is great. You screw up. Try harder. God is great. You're a moron. Try harder. God is great. A better woman would treat her husband better. Try harder. Over and over and over. In fact, as you were pulling out of the driveway today, if your neighbor would have said, like, where are you headed? And you just said, church. And you just said, hey, do you want to go with me? What's the most logical, probably typical reason why they would say, nah, no thanks. Why do I want to go there? Why do I want to go get judged? Right? That's why we do dodgeball tournaments. It's to demonstrate so we can hear people cuss and say, a church is doing this? We love that. Just turning on the head what people expect from you guys and the type of people you are. Isn't it tragic that the founder of our movement, the founder, Jesus himself, the one who lived and died and rose again, he said things like, hey, I didn't come to condemn the world. I came to seek and to save the lost. And 2,100 years later-ish, what people associate his movement with is judgment. And what I would like to suggest to you is they've missed the rest of the story. Because the great news is Jesus' story doesn't end there. Like what enters in this story as we talk about change is an advocate. Watch what happens in Luke 13:8. Sir, and the man speaking here is Jesus now. Like he is embodying this role. Leave it alone for one more year, and I'll dig around and I'll fertilize it. See what Jesus is saying, hold on. Let me step in between you and the judgment, you and the condemnation. Jesus is the advocate. He's stepping between the hatred and the failure and all those things, and he's going, I'll take it. Which in one historical, physical sense is the story, right? Like that we're broken, that we screwed up, that we've fallen short, that we sin, whatever word you want to use, and you can't meet God's standard. And so Jesus came out of heaven and he lived this life. And the reason we'll celebrate Easter in a few weeks with a goat called Bella, it's going to be so much fun, and a high priest with a gnarly beard. Anyway, the reason we get to celebrate Easter is because Jesus took it all. You know what psychologists say is absolutely essential before you can get unstuck? You have to have a demilitarized zone as it relates to failure. You have to have someone that'll step in and go, wait. Enough of the name calling. Enough of the like, you're terrible, you're broken, you're imperfect, you're an idiot. I'll take it. You have to have someone, that's what Jesus is saying here. Like, wait. See, this is the timepiece. Let me absorb this. Let me give more time to the equation. You know, psychologists, they did this study years ago with monkeys, and they wanted to study stress levels and how we best deal with stress. And so this is before PETA ran the world. You guys laughed. Good job. Because the other two services thought that was a dumb joke. If not political, which I'm too ignorant to know that I'm being political. So they had these monkeys and they were friends and they're in this cage and they took one of the monkeys out and they put him in this separate environment and they exposed him to all kinds of stress. I don't know, loud music, small children, all kinds of things that just cause him to like stress out. And they watched his everything happen within his vitals, the things that they do to understand stress was happening. And then they did one thing. And the one thing they did de-escalated his stress to a very high degree. You know what that one thing was? They didn't stop doing the stuff. They took his friend, the other monkey, and they put it in the cage with him. All the stress went down. Let me ask you this. Who's your monkey? You want to freak your coworker out, say, like, I went to church this weekend and they asked me, who's my monkey? And if you're married, please don't call your spouse your monkey. That won't go well. And if you're married, I hope your spouse is one of those people for you. You know, the data would say that they ought not be the only one, that the average person needs 3 to 7 people like that. Well, what I'm getting at is who are the people that you can go to in the midst of your failure and who will put an arm around you and buy some time? Who are the people in the midst of your greatest failures that you can move closer to? And they'll go, no, yeah. It took you 16 years to develop that habit. You're not going to drop it overnight. It took you 10 years to get yourself into this mess. It's going to take some time. Who are those people? And let me ask you this. When you screw up, is God repulsed by you? Or does he invite you to draw near? Because the answer to that question, you'll read everything else about Jesus' life through your answer to that question. And Jesus is going, no, I'm the advocate. I'm stepping in, going, time out. We're done. I'm going to take this, and I'm with you. And then he continues, and we already read this, but he says, leave it alone for 1 more year, and I'll dig around it, and I'll fertilize it. See, here's the catch, though. It's not just like, oh, yeah, he's changing. Why do you think he's changing? Because I flipped the calendar over 3 times ever since he said he was changing the last time. It's not just a time thing. He's saying that there's these 2 elements. I'm going to dig around. I think that's the element of truth. And the reason I think that is because the scriptures constantly talk about truth as something that's a little bit invasive and often uncomfortable, and it cuts. And the scriptures tell us that anytime change actually happens, it's not just intention and it's not just time. Truth has somehow got itself into the relationship. I had the most amazing lunch this week. It's part of why I've just been like so excited this week. There's this couple, and they've been hanging out here since the late fall, maybe early winter, since, I don't know, October, November-ish, I think. And the first time I met them, I already knew they were separated. They'd filed for divorce. They were being fairly civil. They had 2 small children, but like game over. And I had lunch with him. I don't even know what prompted it, but he and I grabbed lunch, and he was just sharing that, like, yeah, we're going these separate directions. There's certain roads, certain bridges have been burned, so to speak. This is the way we're heading. And it was obvious to me that they were paying attention to the Lord in a way they hadn't maybe before ever or in a very long time. And so I was just trying to encourage them and find a balance between, God has done more amazing things than save marriages like yours. He could do that and at the same time be supportive of him. Well, it's one of those deals where he and I, we'll just share these quick conversations here and then, and I've really grown to appreciate both of them. And I think it was around January he had told me that he and his wife had started working on it, and that she had found a therapist and he had found a therapist, and I think they were going weekly initially, and then they'd started going together even. They were kind of hitting pause on some things, and they were being really careful. They weren't telling their kids. They weren't living together. They weren't doing anything like that, like just therapy together for a couple months, I think. And then finally they actually told their parents. And when I sat down with him, he started by going, hey, so we're living together. Like we're back together. And we told our attorneys, like, stop the bus. We're not doing this. He's like, we're a completely different people. It's just crazy. Like we're like 2 different people in the same old marriage. Which is awesome. I mean, this is the stuff that makes me wish that you guys could sit in those chairs more, because you'd see how like getting here at 6 a.m. and vacuuming really contributes to something, or scattering at a dodgeball tournament. We got done, and the waiter came up, and I grabbed the ticket really quick, and I was like, I'm paying, and he's like, could I have a pen? And I was like, what do you need a pen for? It was kind of awkward, and he didn't really answer my questions, and he grabbed his pen, and he reached into his back pocket, and he grabbed a checkbook, and I'm kind of being obstinate. Like, I've got the bill, I've got my credit card, like I'm paying for the bill, and then he's writing this check, and it was this like junior high kid at a dance. Like, what do I do with my eyes right now? Because he's writing this check, and I'm not really sure what I'm, like, it's right across the table from me, like, what am I supposed to do? And I'm watching him, and he writes, Narrate Church. across the top. And then he writes a 1 and 3 zeros. He makes out this check for $1,000. I'm going, what is happening right now? Tears the check out. It was all without words. I'm doing this thing. Tears the check out, puts it on the table, and it was just like a movie. He slid it across at me, and he said, this is what's left of my retainer to my attorney. There's no doubt in my mind that we'd be getting divorced if it wasn't for all that God has done with us around Narrate. Sweet, right? Like, that's incredible. But here's what I want you to catch. Like, they didn't get well because they kept doing the same things over and over and expected a different result. They got truth. They subjected themselves to some therapists, some people who understand God and psychology and marriage and all those things, and they cut on them a little bit. They interjected some truth. They were here and they were wrestling with God and his truth for the first time ever, maybe, I don't know, a long time, I'm not sure. Like, see, Jesus is going, hey, wait a minute, we're going to have to dig around in the soil. And it's going to be uncomfortable. In fact, the author of Hebrews, the way he talked about all this is he says this, for the word of God is alive and active, sharper than any double-edged swords. It penetrates even to dividing soul and spirit, joints and marrow. It judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. And that verse is so brilliant. And yet, like, don't you kind of picture Mel Gibson and Braveheart and we like grab our sword and we beat people up with it and we continue in the culture wars? That is not what he's saying. In fact, the Message, which is this great paraphrase of the New Testament, Eugene Peterson uses the word scalpel. That God's truth, that any truth, it's like a scalpel in the hand of an expert who cuts you right where you need to be cut, and it hurts initially. But it's also the only way to get the tumor out. So Jesus is going, this isn't just like, hey, I love you, you're not a failure. Hey, I love you, you're not a failure. Like, no, we're going to get some truth. Tiger Woods, we have a hard time talking about Tiger today which is so unfortunate. Like, we're such hypocrites when it comes to our sports fandom. When he was 20, I heard this story this week. When he was 21 years old, he made the PGA Tour. He'd won the amateur championship 3 straight years. He made the tour at 21 years old. He qualified. So in golf, there's 3 Super Bowls, essentially. You have the Masters and the U.S. Open and the PGA Championship and the British Open. The Masters one is the first tournament. It's in the spring. Nobody in their first year on the PGA Tour qualifies for the Masters. Tiger Woods had an exemption from his amateur championships, and he qualified. Now, when you qualify for the Masters Championship for the first time, nobody is competitive. I mean, you're like tripping over yourself. You're so nervous. You're so, and then just, well, maybe I'm projecting, but you're just a basket case. Nobody does well their first time. Tiger did well. In fact, Tiger did so well that he made the first cut into the weekend, into the Saturday and Sunday part of the segment. Nobody does that their first time into the Masters. And people who do make the cut into the weekend for the first time, none of them are competitive because you have to learn to choke like 4 or 5 times and how to handle the pressure. He was competitive. In fact, he came into the final round right on the leaderboard. In fact, nobody who's competed in the Master like gets into the final round on the leaderboard. Tiger Woods won the tournament at 21 years old. He won that first Masters tournament by 12 strokes. Completely dominated one of the 4 most difficult tournaments in the world. You know what he did on Tuesday? He picked up a phone, he called a coach in Louisiana and said, hey, there's some things wrong with my swing. I need to come see you. Like, there's some things wrong with my swing, and if I don't get them worked out, I'm not going to get to where I want to be. What is that? It's a guy who's passionate. I get the irony of what I'm about to say, but in that sense, passionate about the truth. Jesus is going, you're gonna have to go looking for the truth. Dr. Cloud tells this brilliant story that captures this, and it also captures boundaries. He tells a story of, there was a season where Dr. Cloud led a clinic in Southern California, and this family came in to see him, and it was the parents who were adults, and then their son and daughter who were also adults at this point. And he came into the room, and he looked at them, and he said, so how can I help you? And the father said, well, I'm here for you to fix my son. And so he turned and looked at the son and said, so what's the problem? And the son said, well, I'm not the problem. It's my son who's not here. He said, oh, okay, so you're here for me to fix your brother, my brother who's not here. And he said, well, why isn't he here? And he said, because he doesn't think he has any problems. And he said, well, maybe he doesn't have any problems. And the dad got a little obstinate, like, yeah, he's got some problems. And he's like, well, what kind of problems does he have? And he says, well, he's 23 years old. He's been smoking dope since he was 15. Dr. Cloud said, so he's mellow. What other problems does he have? he said, well, he's got these friends who have all these holes all over their face and all these tattoos. He's always with the wrong crowd. And he said, okay, I'm not going to touch that one. His people picker's broken, but okay, I'm not going to touch that one. What other problems does he have? He said, well, he's flunked out of 3 colleges. Now just stop and think, like if I gave you the mission of flunking out of 3 colleges, do you think that'd be hard to accomplish? It'd be really hard, wouldn't it? So he said, like, how do you flunk out of 3 colleges? He said, well, he got into the first one barely, and he partied too much, and when he wasn't partying, he was working, and so he flunked out. Great, he said, okay, that makes sense. So how do you get into the second one? He said, I knew some people, I pulled some strings. So he went there, and he partied too much, and when he wasn't partying, he was working, and he flunked out. And he said, so how did he get into the 3rd college? He said, I'm on the board there, so I pulled some strings, and I got him into the 3rd one. And he said, but, the father said, we realized that the dorms were a problem. Like, that caused him to party, so we bought a condo. He said, and then we realized that he was having a hard time getting good grades because he had to work so much, so we just opened a checking account and said there will be all this money in this checking account, so you don't need to work and you don't need to live in the dorms. But he still flunked out. And Dr. Cloud said, imagine that. So he said to this guy, okay, so where's your son at right now? He said. He said, he's in Vail. Vail, Colorado? Yeah, what's he doing in Vail? He's skiing. Who's he skiing with? His friends. Stopped and he said, sir, I hate to tell you this, but I don't think your son has any problems. What do you mean my son doesn't have any problems? He got all defensive. I fired it back to him. He said, sir, you need to understand, like, your son, he's in Vail skiing with his friends. He's got a brand new house and lots of money. I don't think he has any problems. What do you mean he doesn't have any problems? He said, sir, you have the problems. I have the problems. Yeah, he said, you've got a dope smoking problem. You've got a I don't have a college major problem. You've got a, like, friends all have holes in their face problem. Like, you've got a lot of problems. And he said, those aren't my problems. He said, they are your problems. He said, sir, let's think of it this way. Your son's in Vail, Colorado skiing. You're in a psychiatric clinic. Who do you think has the problems? He kept pushing. And he began to explain to him, he said, sir, here's the way I can help you. The way I can help you is I can help you have problems that aren't, or I can help you by helping your son have problems. I can help you by making sure your son's problems are no longer your problems. It's called boundaries, sir. And he began to unpack in the scriptures how God tells us, like, listen, if we absorb people's problems as our own problems, not only are we hurting them, but God holds us responsible. And the guy got really emotional. And he finally looked it up and he said, I can never do what you're telling me to do. What do you mean, sir? I can never let my son, like, loose. That's what I hear you saying. Cause him to suffer for his own actions. I can never do that. Why not? He said, because when I was 7 years old, my father died. And I swore that I would never allow my son to experience what I experienced. I swore I would never abandon my son. He said, sir, your son didn't have a father, and you have too much of one. And as he goes on to tell the story, truth started to enter into the equation from there. He started to receive it, and things started to change. Let me ask you this, who can you trust to give you truth? We all have plenty of people in our lives who are willing to blow sunshine up our skirt, if you know what I mean. Like, who can you count on to bring truth? Time and truth. Who will do that for you? And are the scriptures a part of that? Listen, I think sometimes we talk about reading the Bible like God is an egomaniac and he wants to be the number one on the Amazon book list, and so we got to read the Bible and buy the Bible so that God's ego is fed. That has nothing to do with it. What God says is, hey, my word is truth. It'll help diagnose where things are broken. Like, trust me, are you creating just 5 minutes a day for truth to be a part of that relationship? Listen, you probably know God loves you and thinks you're wonderful, and those things are all true. Are you creating room for him to bring truth into the relationship? And do you have a monkey who also can bring truth into the relationship? And then Jesus says this third thing. He says, then I want to fertilize it. Now, I think the fertilizer is representative of grace, and I'll talk a little bit about why that's the case in just a second. But, when you walk out of the room, you're going to see trees. And what's easy to take for granted is the fact that those trees don't exist unto themselves, and they don't exist by themselves. They require outside nutrients to live. Like, the gardener understands that for you to thrive, for your marriage to thrive, for your business to thrive, wherever it is you're trying to grow, you're going to have to take in outside sources. I love the way Dr. Cloud says it. He says this. Go ahead, Bob, next slide. He says, you are designed to draw life from outside yourself. Entropy is when you stop allowing that to happen. When you stop taking in outside nutrients, that's when the system closes and things start to die. The only self-existent one on the planet is God. The only self-existent one in creation is God. And what happens is we enter into a marriage and we've had 10 years. You got married at 10 years old. We have 20 years. We have 30 years. We have however many years of ingredients and nutrients invested into us. And if you stop growing, it's because you've stopped taking in nutrients. There's a limit to your growth capacity based upon what's been poured into you in the past. I was listening when I was at this conference a couple months ago with Dr. Townsend. At the end, someone asked him, they said, okay, so you're 60-something and I'm 30. He said, tell me, what would you say to yourself, or what would you say to me? What do you wish you could have said to yourself when you were 30? I'll never forget this. He had this really authentic pause, and he stared at his feet, which made him a man after my own heart. And he literally did this, and he said it this succinctly. He said, God is everything. Be very careful with who you let into your life. Spend a lot of money on your own personal development. And that sounds so self-absorbed, and it wouldn't have made sense to me until I sat through a week with him and realized what he's getting at. Like, you've got to have outside resources. And what Jesus talks about here is grace. You know, we talk about grace, and we talk about grace as though it's like God loves us, and that's like 101, like important but very elementary part of grace. In the New Testament, the word for grace is actually two words. It's the words unmerited favor. You know what unmerited means? It means resources outside yourself that you're dependent upon to live. And right here is where we hit the intersection of, I think, what distinguishes Jesus and his invitation from every other idea and movement and ism and religion in the world. See, everything else says, here's the standard, you failed, slap. Here's the standard, you failed, try harder. Here's the standard, you failed, you're an idiot. That's every other system. What makes Christianity, what makes Jesus different is he doesn't get rid of the standard. He loves you way too much and wants way too much glory for himself and life for you to do that. He doesn't get rid of the standard. He says, here's the standard, you failed, I'll come be a part of that with you. And in a very real, historical, theological sense, he came down from heaven. He took on the weight of your sin, your brokenness. There's that piece, which is incredibly important. And I think sometimes we think it's just like a Grand Street production, like it's just a cute illustration of how much God loves you. No, historically essential. But the other piece that makes it unique, what makes Jesus unique, is he says, I'll come with you. And I'm not just going to say, here's the standard, you're an idiot. I'm going to walk with you. I'm going to become a part of it with you. I'm going to leave my Holy Spirit to guide you and lead you through this process. See, what Jesus is saying is, hey, change. You're going to need some time. Let me buy some time for this tree. You're going to need some truth. I'm going to get my hands in the soil. I'm going to mess with it, and it's going to be painful at times, but I'm going to inject new ideas. And you're going to need some nutrients, some ingredients. You're going to need my grace. I said to my therapist friend a couple weeks ago, I said, okay, and I wasn't even trying to be cynical or anything like that. It was kind of coming from this place of discouragement. I said, okay, so answer me this. Because I feel like everybody in the world, like if they just came and saw you, then problems would be solved. And so I said, like, so why do we need the church? Well, why do we need sermons? Why do we need God? Sure seems like we just understand this enough that we could just kind of solve these problems. And I loved her answer. It made the type of person that I want to lead with. She said, because God is what gives you the courage and the strength to do the work. It's a both and. God says, hey, you need some grace. You need my help. Let me walk with you through this. So I don't know where this lands, but I just want to speak to a few of you, especially those of you that are single. Because what I see play itself out in what I do time and time and time again is it's so easy to become completely discouraged by your own capacity to change. Completely discouraged that you can ever reach the ought to, that you can ever actually be a good person. And you know what often happens as a result of that? Your desire for relationship doesn't go away. What happens is you do this like self-inflicted torture thing where what you conclude is you're only a 3, and so the only thing you're worthy of is a 3. And so you marry someone or you get in relationship or you fall in love with someone who's every bit as broken as you are because you're convinced, you're kind of feeling sorry for yourself because you can't actually ever be healthier than that, and so you might as well like force yourself to be with someone like that. Can I just challenge that just for a second? You can change so long as you're willing to do the work. And so can they, so long as they are. But don't get into a relationship with somebody as a person who's willing to do the work with someone who's not. That'll create a disaster. And for those of you that are in relationship with someone and you're trying to figure out, like, am I crazy or do I keep going? Listen, I just appeal to Einstein. Like, it's insanity to try to do the same thing over and over and over again and expect a different result. So he's coming to you and he's going, I'm going to change. What evidence is there? What new elements are being entered? What new truths, what new monkeys are a part of the equation that are going to convince you that there's actually going to be change that happens? See, ultimately my hope for this morning is to create a little bit of a grid. And whether you're talking about your job and your relationship with your boss, or you're talking about your company, or you're talking about your spouse, or you're talking about this person you're in relationship with, that you would understand whether or not the change is really going to happen. Because you can begin to go, yeah, there's time, I can do that. And yes, they're a lover of truth. And yes, they understand their absolute need for God's grace to fuel them in a way that they can never fuel themselves. And if you're someone here and Jesus is a bit of a mystery to you and you've been trying to figure that out, my prayer this week has been that this morning would make that all the more clear. That you begin to understand that he steps in the way of the condemnation. And what we're going to talk about in that Easter series is like your identity changes as a result. That he absorbs it and you become the blessed, beloved son or daughter of God. And then you are motivated to obey, not because you have to, but because you just can't think of anything else to do with your gratitude other than to bring God glory with your pursuit of him. But not because God's great and you're an idiot and you try harder, because God's great and he's walking with you to grow into the person he made you to be.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.